Let me ask you something. When you think about Hindu gods, who comes to mind first? Shiva, Vishnu, Krishna, Durga, maybe Ganesha. And you'd be right. Those are the gods that rule the temples today. The gods in every painting, every prayer, every story passed from grandparent to grandchild. But here's what nobody tells you. Those gods. They weren't the first. There were others. Gods who came before. Gods so ancient that Shiva and Vishnu themselves were minor figures when these beings ruled the cosmos. These are the forgotten gods of the Vedas, and their story, the story of how they rose to absolute power and then faded into silence, is one of the most profound, most mysterious stories in all of human civilization. I'm not exaggerating when I say this. Stay with me. We're going back 3,500 years, maybe further, to a time before temples existed, before idols, before the Puranas were written, to the age of the Rig Veda, the oldest religious text in human history that is still read, still chanted, still alive today. And in that ancient world, there was a completely different cosmos, different rulers, different powers. The question we're going to answer today is this: what happened to them? Why did they disappear? And what does their disappearance tell us about how gods and empires and entire civilizations rise and fall? Let's begin. Imagine you're living around 1500 BCE in the Indus-Saraswati Plains, northwestern India and beyond. There are no stone temples, no statues carved from rock, no holy cities built around shrines. The sacred space is open air, a fire altar called a yajna-kund, dug directly into the earth, and around it priests who have memorized thousands upon thousands of Sanskrit verses, word for word, syllable by syllable, generation after generation, for centuries. This is the Vedic world, and in this world, the gods are not painted on walls. They are fire, they are wind, they are the lightning bolt splitting a monsoon sky. They are forces of nature so overwhelming, so intimate to daily survival. Because one storm could drown your crops, one fire could warm your winter, one sunrise meant you survived another night. That the ancient rishis, the seers, personified them, gave them names, stories, personalities, desires. And here's the first thing you need to understand about the Vedic gods, the thing that makes them completely different from Shiva or Vishnu. These gods were not transcendent beings living in a heaven far away. They were here, present, breathing the same air. You could invite them to your fire. In fact, and this is stunning, the entire ritual system of the Vedas was essentially a divine dinner party. You lit the fire, you chanted the hymns, you poured ghee and soma into the flames, and the gods came. They sat with you, they ate with you, you built a relationship. Agni, the fire god, was literally the host. He was the one who carried your invitation from earth to heaven. Every prayer you offered went through him. Now, who were these gods? How many were there? The Rig Veda, which contains 1,028 hymns, answers this question in a famous exchange. A sage named Vidagdha Shakalya asks the philosopher Yajnavalkya, "How many gods are there?" And Yajnavalkya gives the most remarkable answer in the history of theology. He says, 3,303. Then he's pressed further. He says 33, then 6, then 3, then 2, then 1.5, and finally 1. In one conversation, the Vedas move from polytheism to something approaching monotheism. The message is that all these gods are ultimately faces of a single reality. But for now, let's meet the most important ones, the gods who actually ran the cosmos before Shiva and Vishnu took the throne. There are 5 you absolutely need to know. The first god, and I'd argue the most profound of all of them, is Varuna. Today, if you know Varuna at all, you know him as the god of the ocean, a minor deity, a guardian of the western direction in temple diagrams. But that is the tragic end of a story, not the beginning. In the earliest books of the Rig Veda, Varuna was the supreme ruler of the cosmos, not Indra, not Brahma, Varuna. He was called the all-knowing one, Sahasraksha, the god with 1,000 eyes, meaning nothing in creation could be hidden from him. Every lie told in darkness, every vow broken in secret, every sin committed when no one was watching. Varuna saw it all. He was the guardian of something called Artha, the cosmic order, the principle that keeps the universe functioning, the law that makes the sun rise every morning, the seasons follow each other. Truth remained truth. Varuna wasn't just a powerful god. He was the moral backbone of existence. And the hymns to Varuna in the Rig Veda, they're unlike anything else in ancient religious literature. They're not requests for victory in battle or rain for crops. They're confessions, prayers of guilt and longing, a human soul speaking directly to a god who already knows everything about them. Listen to this. Whatever law of thine, O Varuna, as we are men, day after day we violate. Give us not as prey to death, to be destroyed by thee in wrath. Release me from the upper bond, untie the bond between that I may live. Read that again. This isn't asking for rain or gold or victory. This is a human being asking for forgiveness from a god who knows, who sees, who judges. This is ancient India's version of a prayer of the heart. Varuna also had a weapon unlike anything else in the Vedic arsenal, the pasha, a noose. Not a thunderbolt, not fire, not armies. A noose, because Varuna didn't destroy the wicked. He bound them, he held them. He trapped wrongdoers in the invisible cords of their own karma until justice was served. Think about what that means theologically. This god is not about destruction. He's about consequence. He's about truth catching up with you, not violently, but inevitably. He is in many ways the most sophisticated theological concept in the Vedas. So what happened to him? The fall of Varuna is one of the most fascinating stories in religious history. And it didn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happened slowly, over centuries. It came down to a conflict between two ancient priestly clans, the Brigus and the Angarasas, who disagreed on how to worship the divine. The Angarasas pushed for a more active, warrior-oriented religion. They glorified Indra, the storm god, the fighter, the one who killed demons and brought rain through force. And they quietly sidelined Varuna, whose worship required stillness, contemplation, and moral reckoning. The Vedic world was changing. The people needed a god who would fight for them, not one who watched their sins. And so Varuna faded, first from kingship, then from prominence. Then, by the time of the Puranas, he was relegated to the bottom of the divine hierarchy, a local deity of rivers and the sea. The god who once held the moral order of the universe ended up in charge of fish. If that doesn't break your heart a little, I don't know what will. Now we come to the god who replaced Varuna, Indra. If Varuna was the judge, Indra was the warrior, and in the Vedic age, after centuries of struggle against harsh enemies and harsh nature, the warrior was exactly what the people needed. The numbers tell the story by themselves. The Rig Veda contains 1,028 hymns. More than 250 of them are dedicated to Indra alone. Over a quarter of the entire sacred text. No other god in the history of Hinduism has ever come close to that ratio. He was the king of the Devas, the lord of heaven. He rode a magnificent white elephant named Airavata, the elephant of the clouds, and he wielded Vajra, the thunderbolt, the most feared weapon in all of creation, and he used it. Constantly, dramatically, gloriously. Indra's greatest story, the one that defined him, was the slaying of Vritra. Vritra was a cosmic serpent demon, an asura of enormous power who had swallowed all the world's waters. Rivers stopped flowing, crops died, the cosmos began to collapse. The gods were terrified. Even Brahma fled. Only Indra stood. He drank soma, the sacred drink that made him vast beyond measure. And he charged Vritra alone. The battle shook the foundations of the universe. Indra's thunderbolt struck once, twice, and Vritra fell. The waters poured free. Life returned to the world. That story is not just mythology. It's a memory, a cosmic memory of monsoon rains arriving after deadly drought, of survival, of a warrior god who made the world possible. You understand why people loved Indra, but here's the tragic irony of Indra's story. The very qualities that made him great, his strength, his boldness, his appetites, were also his downfall. By the time of the Puranas, the same Indra who once defeated cosmic demons is shown as insecure, jealous, drunk on soma, and terrified that anyone might take his throne. He sends seductresses to interrupt meditating sages, terrified their spiritual power will rival his own. He commits adultery with Ahalya, the wife of sage Gautama, and is cursed for it, his body covered in 1,000 wounds. And most famously, a young cowherd boy named Krishna defied him. Indra sent storms to destroy a village, petty revenge for being ignored. Krishna simply lifted a mountain to protect everyone, and Indra backed down. The most powerful god of the Vedas, defeated not by a greater warrior, but by love, by devotion, by a child with a flute. Scholars have different theories for why this happened. Some say it reflects changing social values, from a warrior society to an agricultural one. Some say it reflects the theological shift toward devotion, toward Bhakti. But I think the story is telling us something deeper. Power alone, no matter how vast, has an expiration date. Indra ruled by force, Krishna ruled by love, and love lasts longer. That is the Vedic story of Indra, king of heaven, breaker of demons, humbled by a child. Here's something remarkable. Of all the forgotten Vedic gods, one of them never truly left. He's still here, right now, burning at every Hindu wedding you've ever attended, present at every funeral, invoked in every puja where fire is lit. His name is Agni, the fire god, and his story is the most quietly extraordinary of all the Vedic deities, because while the others faded into mythology, Agni transformed. He became something else, something that outlasted everything. In the Rig Veda, Agni held the second most important position after Indra. Over 200 hymns are dedicated to him. In fact, 8 of the 10 books of the Rig Veda begin with a hymn to Agni. Not Indra, not Varuna. Agni. Why? Because Agni was the bridge. He was called the Divine Messenger, the one who carried human prayers upward to the gods and brought divine blessings downward to humanity. Every sacrifice you offered to any god went through Agni first. He was the postal service of the cosmos. Without Agni, no ritual worked. Without Agni, the gods couldn't hear you. He was described as existing in 3 forms: as fire on earth, as lightning in the sky, and as the sun in heaven. He was present everywhere. Light and heat existed, and this is the part that always stops me. The Vedas said Agni lived in you, the fire in your stomach that digests food. That's Agni, the warmth in your heart. Agni, the spark of consciousness that makes you alive. Agni. He was depicted with 2 heads, one facing each direction, 7 tongues of flame, 3 legs representing the 3 worlds. But his most important title was Purohita, the first priest, the chosen mediator between human and divine. And this is why Agni survived when the others didn't. The other gods were powerful in themselves. Varuna judged, Indra fought, but their power lived outside of human daily life. Agni lived inside it. He was the fire you cooked your food on, the fire that kept your children warm, the fire at your wedding altar where you made your vows, the fire that carried your dead ancestors onward. You couldn't remove Agni from life without removing life itself. So while the Puranas reduced him in status, made him one of many guardians subservient to Shiva and Vishnu, Agni simply stayed. In the ritual, in the ceremony, in the fire that burns at every threshold moment of a human life. He didn't need a temple. He didn't need a dedicated following. He was already inside everything. That is the genius, and perhaps the divine joke, of Agni. The god who is supposed to be forgotten is the god you encounter at every important moment of your life. Let me tell you about the two Vedic gods that have always moved me the most. Not because of their power, not because of their armies or weapons, but because of what they represent. The first is Ushas, the goddess of dawn, and the second is Surya, the sun. Together they opened the world every single morning. They drove back the darkness, which in the Vedic mind was not merely the absence of light, but the presence of chaos, of demons, of death, and made life possible for another day. Every single morning. Ushas is described in the Rig Veda in some of the most beautiful poetry ever written in Sanskrit. She is a young woman, always young, always renewed, riding a golden chariot across the sky. Her horses are reddish gold like the light of dawn. She wears no armor, she carries no weapon. She is described as the life of all life and the breath of all breaths. She is the one who sets every living creature in motion each morning. The birds, the animals, the humans rising to their duties. Without Ushas arriving first, nothing would begin. The scholars who study the Vedas call her hymns some of the most elevated poetry in the entire Rig Veda. There's a tenderness to them, a gratitude, like someone writing a love letter to the morning light. Then comes Surya, the sun god. In the Vedic world, Surya was not just the physical star in the sky. He was the eye of Varuna, the all-seeing witness of the cosmic order. He measured the days. He extended the length of human life. He healed the sick. He was called the soul of the moving world. The Rig Veda says, Surya illuminates the whole world, for men and gods alike. Now here's something extraordinary that most people don't know. A young Vishnu, yes, the same Vishnu who later becomes one of the supreme gods of Hinduism, appears in the Rig Veda as a solar deity associated with Surya. He takes 3 cosmic steps across the universe to measure it. That's all he does in the early Vedas. 3 steps. He is a minor character, a footnote to Surya's story. And yet, 1,000 years later, Vishnu is supreme, and Surya has faded into a secondary deity. The gods themselves don't know the future of the gods, so we've met them. Varuna the judge, Indra the warrior, Agni the messenger, Ushas the dawn, Surya the sun. The question that's been hanging over this entire story is, why did they fade? And I want to give you a real answer. Not a simple one. The first reason is historical. Between roughly 1000 BCE and 500 BCE, Indian civilization transformed. Cities grew larger, trade routes expanded, social complexity increased, and with that complexity came a need for gods who could govern interior life, not just the weather. The Vedic gods were brilliant representations of natural forces. But natural forces don't give you guidance on dharma, on how to live, how to love, how to rule, how to die with dignity. The Upanishads began asking deeper questions. What is the self? What is consciousness? What is the nature of reality behind the appearances? And the Vedic gods, great and powerful as they were, weren't quite built for those questions. Shiva could answer them. Vishnu could answer them. The great goddesses could answer them. And so the theological center of gravity shifted. The second reason is something more human and more uncomfortable. Every civilization tells stories that serve its needs in the present moment. When the Vedic people needed rain and military victory, they worshipped Indra. When they needed moral order, they called to Varuna. When they needed inner transformation and devotion, they turned to Krishna and Shiva. The gods didn't change. The needs did. And here is perhaps the deepest insight the Vedic tradition itself offers us. Yajnavalkya told us, all of these gods, 33 or 3,303 or 3.3 million, they are all ultimately one, different faces of the same infinite reality. The Vedic gods didn't disappear. They evolved, they merged, they were absorbed. Varuna's cosmic order became Vishnu's dharma. Indra's thunder became Shiva's power. Surya's light became the divine grace that flows through all deities. The flame changed candles. But the fire never went out. We started this journey with a single flame, and here we are at the end, still staring at that same flame. I want to leave you with one thought. The forgotten gods of the Vedas weren't failures. They weren't defeated. They weren't replaced because they were wrong. They were the first words of a conversation that humanity is still having. Varuna asked, "Can you live with the truth about yourself?" Indra asked, "Are you willing to fight for what matters?" Agni asked, "How do you connect the human to the sacred?" Ushas asked, "Can you greet each morning with gratitude?" Surya asked, "What do you do with the light you're given?" These are not ancient questions. These are the questions of your life, right now, today, and the fact that 3,500 years ago, human beings were already asking them, already burning their fires, chanting their prayers, reaching towards something beyond themselves. That tells you something about what we are. We are a species that has always known, in our deepest place, that the world is more than what we can touch. The Vedic rishis knew it. They just called it differently. The gods were never forgotten, really. They were waiting, in fire, in dawn, in the vast ocean sky above you, in the first warm light that hits your face when you open your eyes in the morning. They were always here. We just stopped looking. In the last episode, we went back 3,500 years and met the gods that came before everything. Varuna the All-Seeing, Indra the Warrior King, Agni the Undying Messenger, Ushas of the Dawn, Surya, the soul of the world. We watched them rise to absolute power, and then we watched the world change around them. And I left you with one idea. The flame didn't go out. It just moved to a new candle. Today, we follow the flame. Because here's the question that's been sitting in the back of your mind since part 1 ended. How exactly did Shiva come from Rudra, a minor, terrifying Vedic ghost god, and become the supreme being, the lord of the cosmos, the god who contains all contradiction? How did a 3-step minor solar deity named Vishnu become the preserver of the universe, and then become Krishna, the god who changed everything by simply picking up a flute? And Brahman, the concept that makes Hindu philosophy unlike anything else in the history of human thought. Where did that come from? Because it wasn't in the early Vedas either. The answer to all 3 of those questions traces back to seeds planted in the very Vedic world we explored last time. The old gods didn't just fade, they became the soil, and from that soil, something far more extraordinary grew. Let's go. Before we can talk about the new gods, we have to talk about the revolution that made them possible. Around 800 BCE, something extraordinary began to happen in the forests of ancient India. Sages started walking away from the fire altars. They walked into the forests, they sat down, and they asked a question that the entire Vedic religion, up to that point, had never really asked directly. Not, how do we please Indra? Not, how do we make it rain? Not, how do we win in battle? They asked. What is real? What is the nature of existence itself? What is consciousness? Who is the self? And, the most dangerous question of all, is there something beyond all these gods? These conversations were recorded in texts called the Upanishads, over 100 of them, written across several centuries. Dense, difficult, astonishing, and the Upanishads did something that changed Indian civilization permanently. They said, yes, there is something beyond all the gods. They called it Brahman. Not Brahma, the creator god. We'll come to him. But Brahman, spelled differently. The ultimate ground of all existence, the one reality behind all appearances, the infinite consciousness that underlies the universe. And then they said something even more radical. They said, that infinite consciousness, it's not just out there in the cosmos, it's inside you. The famous equation of the Upanishads is Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, or Tat Tvam Asi, that thou art. Meaning, the divine ground of the universe, and the deepest part of your own self, are the same thing. Let that land for a moment. 3,000 years ago, sages sitting in Indian forests were teaching that every human being carries the infinite within themselves. That is not mythology. That is philosophy of the highest order, and it changed everything. Because once you have that concept, once you have Brahman as the ultimate ground of reality, you have a completely new framework for understanding the gods. The gods are no longer just powerful beings who control the rain and the thunder. They become faces of the infinite, windows into Brahman. Ways for the human mind, which can't directly comprehend the infinite, to approach it through form, through story, through devotion. Shiva is not just a destroyer. He is Brahman wearing the face of transformation. Vishnu is not just a preserver. He is Brahman wearing the face of compassion and sustenance. Krishna is not just a cowherd turned charioteer. He is Brahman speaking directly to you, through love. The Upanishads built the philosophical foundation that made all of this possible. Without them, there is no Bhagavad Gita, no Bhakti movement, no Shaivism, no Vaishnavism. The Vedas gave India its gods. The Upanishads gave India its theology, and from that theology, three figures emerged who would define Hinduism forever. Let me introduce you to a god you might not know. His name is Rudra, and in the early Vedas he is not beloved. He is not the destroyer who creates the cosmic yogi, the husband of Parvati, the father of Ganesha. In the early Vedas, Rudra is feared. He appears in the margins of the Rig Veda, rarely, uncomfortably. The gods don't invite him to their sacrifices. They give him the leftover offerings, the polluted remainder. Not because they honor him, but because they are terrified of what he might do if they don't. He is the howler, the god of the storm and the hunt and disease. He shoots invisible arrows that cause sickness. He roams the cremation grounds and the wilderness. He is outside the ordered Vedic world, and yet, and this is the key, he is also a healer. The Vedic hymns beg him not to strike. They call him gentle, with a desperation that sounds exactly like people who know he is anything but gentle. The Rig Veda calls him fierce and yet kind, destructive and yet the lord of medicines, the most dangerous and the most necessary. This is the Vedic seed of Shiva, a being of absolute contradiction. And over the next 1,000 years, that contradiction became the most sophisticated theological portrait of any deity in human history. Here's how it happened. As the Vedic world expanded eastward, into territories that already had their own spiritual traditions, something remarkable occurred. The Vedic Rudra began to merge with a different, even older god. Scholars believe that the Shiva of the Indus Valley civilization, possibly represented on the famous Pashupati seal, showing a seated yogi surrounded by animals, was worshipped in India long before the Vedic people arrived. Some put this as far back as 3000 BCE. This proto-Shiva was the lord of animals, the great ascetic, the meditating master of yoga. When Vedic Rudra and this ancient yogi god merged, something unprecedented was born. A deity who embodied both the wild external power of the storm and the wild internal power of consciousness. Both destroyer and source of liberation. Both the god of death and the one who grants immortality. Then the Upanishads did their work. In the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, written in the last centuries before the Common Era, something historic happened. For the first time in any text, Rudra is called Shiva, and not just named, elevated. In this Upanishad, a sage had a direct vision of Rudra Shiva as the absolute, as Brahman itself, as the ultimate ground of all existence that the early Upanishads had described in abstract terms, now revealed as a person, as a god you could love and know. The text declares, Rudra is truly one, for the knowers of Brahman do not admit the existence of a second. He alone rules all the worlds by his powers. He dwells as the inner self of every living being. Read that again. The terrifying marginal ghost god of the early Vedas has become the Atman, the self, inside every person. That is one of the most extraordinary theological transformations in the history of religion. And then the Puranas, composed between the 4th and 12th centuries CE, completed the portrait. They gave Shiva his family, his stories, his iconography, the crescent moon in his matted hair, representing the cycles of time, the river Ganga flowing from his locks, representing the descent of cosmic consciousness into the material world, the third eye representing the fire of awareness that burns away illusion, ash on his body representing the transcendence of death itself. Every element of Shiva's iconography is a philosophical statement. He meditates in cremation grounds because death holds no power over him. He dances the Tandava not out of rage, but because creation and destruction are the same movement. He is the destroyer, yes, but destruction in Shiva's theology is not an ending. It is the necessary clearing that makes renewal possible. The Vedas gave India a wild, fearsome storm god who lived at the edge of the ordered world. The Upanishads revealed him as the self inside all things. The Puranas made him human enough to love. That is the full arc of Shiva, from Rudra, the howler, to Mahadeva, the great god. It took 2,000 years, but every step was built on the one before. In part 1, I told you something that probably surprised you. Vishnu, the second god of the Hindu Trinity, one of the supreme deities of a civilization of over 1 billion people, appeared in the Rig Veda as a minor character. He takes 3 cosmic strides across the universe. That's his big moment. 3 steps. He is associated with Surya, the sun god. He is considered benevolent, friendly, supportive. He represents the energy that sustains rather than destroys. But he is not a major player. Indra has 250 hymns. Agni has over 200. Vishnu, a handful. And yet today, Vishnu is worshipped by hundreds of millions of people through his avatars. Rama, the ideal king. Narasimha, the lion man. Vamana, the dwarf. And most of all, most powerfully of all, Krishna. So what happened? How do you go from 3 steps to the Bhagavad Gita? The first shift happened in the Brahmanas, the ritual texts that followed the Rig Veda. Here, Vishnu begins to absorb attributes of other Vedic gods. His 3 strides, originally a solar metaphor for the sun's journey across the sky, begin to take on cosmic significance. He becomes the deity who measured and sustained the universe itself. Then, the Upanishads extended him further. As the concept of Brahman developed, Vishnu began to be identified as one of its closest expressions, the preserving, sustaining face of the Absolute. The god whose nature is compassion, whose essential quality is to maintain dharma, to hold the world together. And then, something happened that had nothing to do with the Vedic tradition at all. A completely separate worship tradition emerged, centered in the Mathura region of northern India, around a historical figure or divine being named Vasudeva Krishna. Historians debate the exact origins of Krishna worship. Some place it as early as the 4th century BCE. What's clear is that this was a different stream of devotion, emotional, intimate, centered not on fire sacrifices and cosmic order, but on personal love between the devotee and the divine. Krishna worship was the religion of the heart. And at some point, in one of the great creative syntheses of human religious history, the Vedic Vishnu and the folk devotional Krishna merged. Krishna became an avatar of Vishnu. Vishnu's cosmic sustaining power was channeled into Krishna's personal, intimate, loving presence. The result was a theological revolution, and the text that sealed it, the text that became the single most influential document in Indian history, was the Bhagavad Gita. Written somewhere between 500 and 200 BCE and embedded in the Mahabharata, the Gita is the moment where everything the Vedas had been building toward finally speaks. Arjuna stands on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, paralyzed. He cannot fight, he cannot run, he cannot choose. And Krishna, his charioteer, his friend, his god, turns to him and begins to speak. What follows is 18 chapters that synthesize the entire Upanishadic tradition into practical wisdom. Krishna tells Arjuna about karma, action without attachment to results, which comes from the Vedic concept of yajna, sacrifice. You act, you offer the action, you release the outcome. Krishna tells him about jnana, the knowledge of the self that the Upanishads unlocked. You are not the body. You are not the mind. You are the eternal Atman that cannot be destroyed. And then Krishna reveals the path that would come to define Hinduism more than anything else. Bhakti, devotion. Fix your mind on me, Krishna says. Be devoted to me, worship me, bow down to me, so shall you come to me. It sounds simple, but this was radical. The Vedic tradition required complex rituals performed by trained priests. The Upanishadic path required deep philosophical knowledge. Both were, effectively, for the educated elite. Krishna's bhakti opened the divine to everyone, the farmer who can't read Sanskrit, the woman excluded from Vedic ritual, the child, the grieving parent, the broken-hearted lover. All of them could love Krishna, and through love, reach the divine. The Bhagavad Gita has been called the sealing achievement of the consolidation of Hinduism, the text that took every stream of the tradition and wove them into one, and it could only have existed because of what the Vedas built first. The concept of yajna, Vedic sacrifice, became the template for karma yoga. Every action as an offering. The concept of urta, Varuna's cosmic moral order, became the foundation for dharma, the organizing principle of the entire Gita. The concept of Agni as the bridge between human and divine became the concept of the guru, the teacher who carries the student toward the light. Every major idea in the Bhagavad Gita has a root that goes back to the fire altars of 1500 BCE. Krishna didn't replace the Vedas, he fulfilled them, and the story didn't end with the Gita. Between the 6th and 17th centuries CE, the Bhakti movement swept across India like a wildfire. Some poets composed hymns in regional languages, Tamil, Marathi, Bengali, Hindi, making the divine accessible to everyone. The Alvars in Tamil Nadu composed ecstatic devotional poetry to Vishnu Krishna. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Bengal launched a movement of congregational chanting, Sankirtana, that transcended all caste barriers. Mirabai wrote love songs to Krishna from prison, choosing death over abandoning her devotion. Every single one of them was, in a direct line, the continuation of what began in the Upanishads and crystallized in the Gita. The Vedic fire, the Upanishadic insight, the Gita's synthesis, the Bhakti movement's explosion of love. One continuous river flowing across 3,500 years. Still here. Good. We have one more revelation left, and it's the biggest one. What is Brahman? Really? And why did the Vedas plant a seed that would take 2,000 years to fully bloom? Let's finish this. We need to talk about the idea that, in my view, is the single greatest contribution of the Vedic Upanishadic tradition to human thought. Not Shiva, not Krishna, not the Gita, Brahman. And I want to be careful here, because this concept is easy to misunderstand and almost impossible to fully explain in words, which is exactly what the tradition itself keeps saying. Let me try anyway. In the early Rig Veda, there is a concept called Brahman with a small b. It referred to the sacred power of the ritual speech, the mantras themselves, the vibrational force of correctly chanted Sanskrit that could invoke the gods, make the sacrifice work, hold the cosmic order. The priests who wielded this power were called Brahmins. The rituals that used it were Brahmanical rituals. Sacred sound, sacred speech, the power in the word. But the Upanishadic sages looked at that concept and asked, if there is sacred power in the word, what is the ground of that power? What is the reality from which sacred speech emerges? And their answer was Brahman with the capital B. The ultimate ground of all existence, not a god, not a creator, not a being with a personality or a name. the infinite consciousness that is the substratum of everything that exists. The Chandogya Upanishad attempts to describe it this way. Brahman is the truth of truth. The vital force is truth, and Brahman is its truth. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says, Brahman is consciousness, Brahman is bliss. The Mandukya Upanishad opens with, all this is Brahman, not. Brahman created all this, not. Brahman is beyond all this. All this is Brahman. The universe isn't something Brahman made. The universe is Brahman appearing. The cosmos is the divine body. This is not Western theology. In most Western religious traditions, God and the universe are separate. God created the world, but God is not the world. In Vedantic thought, Brahman doesn't create the universe from outside it. Brahman becomes the universe. Like gold becoming a ring. The ring is new, but it's still gold. Remove the name and form, and all that remains is Brahman. And then, the equation that changed India forever. Tattvam asi. That thou art. The sage Uddalaka says to his son, Shvetaketu, the Brahman that is the ground of the universe, and the Atman that is the deepest self within you. They are not two different things. They are the same. You are not a small, isolated individual consciousness, trying to reach the divine from a great distance. You are already Brahman. You have always been Brahman. The only thing standing between you and that realization is a veil of ignorance, Maya, the appearance of separation. Lift the veil, and what remains is infinite, undivided, eternal consciousness. That is the ultimate message of the Vedic Upanishadic tradition. And notice, it took 1,000 years to get there from the first fire altars. Now, here's where it gets really interesting for our story. How do Shiva, Vishnu, and Krishna fit into Brahman? The tradition itself gives several different answers, which is one of the most honest things about Hinduism. Advaita Vedanta, founded by Adi Shankaracharya in the 8th century CE, says, Brahman alone is real. All the gods, Shiva, Vishnu, Krishna, all of them are ultimately forms of the one formless Brahman. Worship them as a path to realization, but ultimately, there is only one. The Vaishnava traditions say, Brahman is personal. It has a face. That face is Vishnu Krishna. The personal God is not less than the impersonal Absolute. It is the Absolute, choosing to reveal itself in a form that can be loved. The Shiva traditions say, Shiva is Brahman, the cosmic consciousness that meditates eternally at the center of everything. That is what Shiva represents. And here's the beautiful thing. All three are drawing from the same Vedic and Upanishadic sources. Same river, different banks from which they drink. The Vedas didn't give them just one answer. They gave them the foundation to find their own. Before we close, I have to tell you about the third member of the Hindu Trinity, because his story might be the strangest of all. Brahma, creator of the universe. 4 heads, 4 arms, holding the Vedas themselves. The being from whose mind all living things were born. And yet, across all of India, with over 1 billion Hindus, there are fewer than 10 temples dedicated to Brahma. The most famous one is in Pushkar, Rajasthan. And even there, scholars debate whether worship was ever truly mainstream. The creator of everything, worshipped by almost no one. Now, here's what I promised you at the start. You made it all the way to the end. If this story stayed with you, if something in it touched something in you, keep that like, subscribe, ring the bell, and if it didn't move you, no hard feelings. But if it did, share this with one person you think needs to hear it. That's how these forgotten gods finally get remembered.